What is going on, hybrid shooters? It's Jason Vong, and I'm currently in the market right now for a 35mm f1.4 lens for my Sony Alpha cameras. There are currently two options out in the market right now: the Zeiss 35mm f1.4, which, by the way, this isn't mine, guys. This is a loaner from Sony Pro Support and Lens Rental. And the other one is, of course, the Sigma Art 35mm f1.4, which is newly released and native to the Sony E-mount. There's also the rumored Zeiss Spottis 40mm f2 to be announced in the next few days. So I'll definitely talk a little bit more about that towards the end of the video. But let me know in the comments down below if you're excited for the Spottis 40mm or any of these 35mm lenses. Personally, I think the 35mm is a great focal length for everyday walk-around general lens for both full frame and APS-C cameras. And I really love the blur that the f1.4 gives off. It really helps isolate your subject, killing all the distractions in the background and giving your photo and video almost an ethereal look to it. Last week we rented out both the Sigma Art 35 and the Zeiss 35 and brought it with us to Anime Expo, the largest Japanese pop culture convention in the United States. Now, if you've ever been to any of those types of events, then you would know it's kind of hard to shoot there with a tight lens because there's just so many people there. That's why having a 35mm is extremely helpful in that situation, because it gives you that flexibility to still get that full body shots of the cosplayers and blur the crowd out in the background. Also, the f1.4 comes in clutch in low light situations, especially when I'm shooting concerts. Earlier, I mentioned that the 35 is also great for APS-C cameras such as the Sony a6000 or the Sony a6500, because when you mount a 35mm on a crop body, you're effectively getting a 50mm equivalent. So it's not going to be as tight as if you were to mount an actual 50mm on a APS-C camera. That would actually give you like an 82.5mm, I believe. It's going to be way too tight. So mounting a 35mm on a crop body will actually give you a lot more flexibility and give you close to that 50mm look. Though keep in mind, this setup right here will be front heavy, but the image quality that you'll be getting from this combo will be worth it. Personally, the reason why I am looking at something like this is because I shoot a lot of these talking head style videos for YouTube, and I'm very self-conscious of what my background looks like. It is incredibly messy here in this room. Cable management is obviously non-existent. So having that f1.4 would definitely eliminate the distractions in the background so you guys can focus on me. Also, I have a fairly small space, so using anything tighter than the 35 would make it hard to shoot. Right now, I'm using a 16-35 f2.8 G Master at 35 at 2.8, which, you know, isn't bad, but I prefer a wider aperture. Now, for my longtime followers, you guys know that I had the Zeiss 35mm f1.4 a couple years ago. I sold it and I had massive regrets for doing that, because at the time I had a thing for ultra wide angle lenses at a very fast open aperture. So I picked up the Sigma 20mm 1.4, but unfortunately I couldn't justify keeping it just because, one, it is incredibly massive. I couldn't mount it on my gimbal at the time, which was the Zhiyun Crane V2. It was just way too front heavy for it. Plus, at the time, it was only the EF version. I had to use the MC11 adapter to adapt it to my Sony bodies. And when you do that, the autofocus performance isn't on par when you're shooting videos. Also, it wasn't very good for vlogging either, just because of the autofocus motor noise of the Sigma Art EF lenses. So I never really had a chance to use it, so I ended up returning it. So I was out a 20mm 1.4 and a 35mm 1.4. And I was going to get the Zeiss 35 again, but after hearing that Sigma will be releasing a 35mm that is native to the Sony bodies, I decided to wait. And lo and behold, almost a year plus later, it's finally here. So finally, last week, I got my hands on the Sigma Art 35 1.4 and I tested it against the Zeiss 35 1.4 at Anime Expo, and just from the photo results alone, it seemed like the Sigma 35 is a tad bit sharper over the Zeiss. However, there are reports of autofocus issues with the Sigma 35. I personally had the Sigma Art 35 hang up on me while I was shooting. The autofocus just wasn't responding whenever I was soft pressing the shutter. It would take a while before it kind of reacts again, which was very weird. I didn't have that issue with the Sigma Art 50 or the 85. I think it was just the 35 itself. So not only does the Zeiss has the better, but also the more reliable autofocus, which is uber important to me because I shoot a lot of these talking head style videos. I want to have the confidence that the camera and the lens is sticking focus on me. Now, it's not to say that the Sigma Art 35 is a terrible video lens. It's quite the opposite. If you are someone who prefers to manual focus when shooting a video, the Sigma Art would actually be the better choice because you have finer controls with the manual focus versus something like this, which is fly-by-wire focus, making it hard to get really precise manual focusing. Now let's talk about the price, which would be a no-brainer for most of the people that are watching. The Sigma Art 35 will run you about $899, while the Zeiss 35 will run you about $1,598, a $700 whopping difference, twice the cost of the Sigma Art lens. You could probably pick up 2 Sigma Art lenses for the price of one Zeiss 35. With that said, if you prefer to own the Zeiss lens instead, you can probably pick up a used one for about $1,100 to $1,300. I personally sold mine for $1,200 on Craigslist. So with that said, if you are a casual photographer, a portrait photographer, someone who won't be shooting at a fast-paced environment, or maybe you're a video shooter who don't mind manual focusing, then definitely go with the Sigma. They're the best bang for your buck, especially for the quality. But if you are a hybrid shooter, an event shooter such as myself, I'm gonna say go with the Zeiss. I shoot a lot of events like weddings. I definitely want to have that autofocus reliability. So that is my choice right there. I'm gonna pick the Zeiss 35 1.4. But actually, before I commit to that lens, rumor has it that Zeiss is releasing the 40mm f2 bodice. It's gonna be announced in the next few days, apparently. So I definitely want to test that lens out and see if maybe that would be better for me. Now, some people have left me comments saying that the 40mm is a little bit awkward, but I think it's a good in-between based on the existing lineup. So the bodice series currently has the 18, the 25, and it jumps to the 85 and 135. So you definitely need to have something that bridges the gap between 25 and 85 without competing with the existing 50mm that's already out from Zeiss and Sony. And based on the track record of the bodice lenses, you can bet that the autofocus performance will be very solid and very quiet. You can also bet that the price tag will be quite hefty. I'm gonna predict that it will be around $1,200. But until I have a video on the bodice 40mm, my next video will be on the Sigma Art 50mm. And if it's out already, you can probably see it somewhere here on the screen. If not, you can catch up on my comparison video between the Sigma Art lenses and the Zeiss lenses right here, or click right here to see the best Sigma APS-C lens for your Sony a6000 camera. Guys, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys in my next video. Peace.